Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Clarissa Morosky with the Reloop platform, and today we're going to talk about some elements of the international legally binding instrument on plastics pollution, which after that mouthful, we'll just refer to it as the instrument from here on in. But first, a little bit about Reloop. Reloop is building a world free of waste by leading the transition to a global circular economy where our natural resources remain resources. And we work at the center of policymaking with governments, industry stakeholders, and NGOs. Our policy positions and recommendations are always based on data-driven research, real-world case studies and experience, best-in-class principles, and the collective expertise of our team. And we enjoy bringing together a wide range of partners and organizations to help inform our network and to encourage their contribution to the creation of a thriving global circular economy. As for the collective expertise of our team, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Dominic Hogg, who has been working with Reloop since before INC2, so that we can have an informed voice within the total INC process. Reloop is an accredited NGO under UNEP. Now, Dominic has 30 years of experience in environmental matters as a campaigner, researcher, and consultant. He set up Eunomia Research and Consulting in 2001, where he was the chairman and lead director of the company's work on policy, strategy, and sustainable business. Today, Dominic is now looking for new ways to solve enormous environmental problems facing us. As head of Equinimator, Dominic looks at novel market mechanisms and technologies that enable their deployment across environmental themes, including climate change, waste management, resource management, biodiversity loss, air quality, etc. So thank you for being with us today, Dominic.
Hi, Clarissa. It's great to be here.
So let's just jump right into the zero draft document that was released after INC2 and just leading up to INC3, which is sort of the framework document that looks at how the document is going to be structured and the various options for different measures within the document. So let's just jump right to it. Let's start with option 1 versus option 2. Can you elaborate on the key differences between these options and their potential impacts, and also why the choice between option 1 and option 2 or 3 in implementing control measures matters so much for the effectiveness of the instrument to combat plastics pollution?
Yes, thanks, Clarissa. So this is basically, the zero draft is split up into several parts, and part 2 is the bit that sort of includes what I suppose most people are looking for as the main measures. So it includes things like reducing primary plastic production. It talks about waste management. It talks about problematic single-use items and problematic other items, things like intentionally added microplastics and so forth. And there are a number of measures in total in the zero draft, and if you include each one of the sub measures as a measure in its own right, and it probably makes sense to do so, then there are a couple of measures for which the Secretariat has proposed 3 different options. There are 8 different measures where 2 different options are proposed, and there's 9 measures for which there's only one option that is put forward. Now, most of the really interesting stuff is in those control measures where there's either 2 or 3 options. And the key thing is that in the option 1, there is what's being anticipated is effectively an instrument which would effectively set out the targets, the things that are going to be banned, the things that are going to be regulated, how design is going to go forward for plastics and plastic packaging and so forth. And that's going to be effectively in the instrument in annexes linked to each of those control measures. Now, the difference between that and the option 2, or where there is a third option, the option 3 approach, is that instead of there being, as it were, targets and specific items being banned and so forth in the instrument itself, what's going to happen is that the control measure would be linked to an annex that basically sets out certain criteria, which each of the parties would then go away and look at and assess for themselves and say, well, okay, what things should we ban? What level of reduction in plastic production should we look for? What recycling targets should we look for? What reuse, refill targets should we set, etc., etc. So they're going to go away and do that, and then they're going to come back and propose what they're going to do in their national plans, which are covered in Part 4 of the instrument. My experience is there's almost invariably what we call an implementation gap. Even if you've got an option 1 that says, right, you, the parties, will do A, B, C, D, E, whatever, it's then down to the parties, of course, to implement the measures within their own borders to actually achieve those outcomes. And almost invariably, they fall short. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes people achieve their targets, but they typically fall short, and they have to amend them, upgrade them, so that in future they get to where they want to be. In the option 2 or option 3 world, we haven't even set the level of ambition. And so what experience tells us people will do is they will those people who don't really want to go for lots of ambition will opt for an option 2 version of the instrument. They'll then scale down that ambition and put it in their national action plans. But then they've still got to try and meet what they've said they're going to meet in their national action plans. And so you've got, as it were, 2 steps down from where you really need to be to fulfill the objective of the instrument. There's lots of other things that worry me about that. So even in countries with plenty of institutional capacity to do all this, setting out, adjudicating exactly what you do against all these various criteria set out in the different annexes in an option 2 type world is not straightforward. And so it's going to take time, energy, and expertise. And in many of the countries we're talking about, that expertise doesn't exist in the governments and so forth at the moment. So there'll be a lag in time in terms of how people do this. It'll be complicated. It'll take time. The other thing that's going to happen if we leave all of this open to the parties to look at and come forward in national action plans is, guess what? You're going to have a patchwork of bans, regulations, targets, etc., etc. So if you're a business and you're looking for this instrument to try and harmonize what's going on across the world, the option 2 world says to you, well, you can forget it, because it'll depend on how tightly those criteria are going to be specified in the annexes. So the risk is, from a private company's point of view, they end up with how many countries might sign up to this instrument? Who knows? And an option 2 world, it may be that more people might sign up. That may be the objective of the UN. I don't know. But if you end up with, say, almost 200 countries signing up and setting this patchwork of regulations about what's banned, what's allowed, what's the eco-design criteria, etc., etc., that's not an easy world to actually work in as a business.
And Dominic, what are you hearing from the business community? Have you been hearing from some of the leaders in the sort of the multinational field where they are actually having resources within their company to focus on the zero draft? What are you hearing from that business community?
In the main, certainly, of course, I'm not hearing from everyone, but the message that seems to be coming across from business is they want to see harmonization. You will not get that under an option 2 instrument. And that's consistent. That message about harmonization is completely consistent with what we've seen for many, many years in the European Union.
So it sounds like, without a doubt, option 1 is the preferred option. It's better for member states, and it's also better for business. So in fact, there should be no question.
There are some common themes here, and we know, broadly speaking, what they are. And so it will make sense, I think, to go more for that option 1 type of instrument. And I hope that's what happens in Nairobi. And I hope that the delegates will see that and understand that actually just going forward with an instrument that is basically leaving it up to every party to more or less decide what it's going to do, is that going to get us where we, globally, everyone needs to be to protect the rivers and the oceans that certainly I feel was one of the key motivations for the INC for having a mandate to develop this instrument in the first place.
I recently heard that the waste trade situation at a global level, illegal waste trade, is valued at just second to human trafficking, which speaks to what a huge problem it is, especially within countries that don't have as much control. Can you perhaps make a link between solving that problem, this treaty, and the kinds of standards and reporting requirements that could be needed coming out of it?
Yeah, well, this is a massive problem, and let's be perfectly frank about this. It creates, both those issues create human misery, and both of them have strong links to organized crime. And so they are both terrible enterprises, if I may put it that way, that we need, that are basically a scourge on humanity. So we do need to address those. In terms of what the sort of harmonization of standards and so forth might help do, first of all, we know from experience that we need a decent chain of custody of where all this stuff goes. That's absolutely central to this. And, you know, it's actually an area where some of the countries that are starting from a low base can actually make use of really interesting new big data type technologies, which some countries like where I'm sitting in the UK, taking ages to do this. We've just implemented a sort of new, electronic data system that's about to come in here in the UK. But we should have done that ages ago. Too much as there is a lot of stuff in the UK that's just still submitted on paper and isn't really well analysed and brought together. We need to be properly tracking this stuff, and if we're properly tracking it, not only do we know then, for example, whether something's genuinely being recycled or not, or what's the where's the recycled content going, and how are we going to have a chain of custody for that. But we start to understand where's the stuff sort of disappearing, and if it is disappearing, we can start to target these areas where we think that there's every chance that those sort of the points where the data trail just goes cold. There's every chance that those are the places where something not quite legal is going on. And it'll give us a good place to start to look at that. So not only will we end up with a good and harmonized basis for people reporting their performance, but as a consequence of tracking the waste materials from after they come to the end of their life, we'll have a better chain of custody to understand where this stuff is going, and to prevent it going into illegal channels. And it's worth adding on that where it's worth comparing what we do before somebody purchases something with what we do after it. And we have these incredibly complex systems that allow us to track everything that, and there'll be data rich, and companies looking to acquire the data from people who've got sales information and so forth from various businesses. We've got brilliant data about everything, about what I consume, what you consume, and so forth. But what do we know about what happens after? It's an incredibly interesting contrast. And I think that we're in a situation today where, with all of the big data systems that we've got, and the AI to help us, if you like, identify where these things are, where are these points where stuff is just disappearing. We can do this today, and we can probably do it far more cheaply than we can doing things as we used to do, and probably are still doing in places like the UK, in a slightly cumbersome manner. We've got to be smart about this. And there are ways where certainly countries who are currently doing less can sort of leapfrog into positions where countries like the UK already should be.
That takes us to the end of our blogcast on these very important issues facing INC3 and also moving into INC4. Dominic, I want to thank you for being here today. And for anyone that is going to the negotiations, I think it's safe to say that you will be in Canada in April of 2024, we hope, as part of the ReLoop team, and I will certainly be in Nairobi next week. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dominic, and elaborating on the position papers. It's been incredibly thoughtful, and I hope that the people that need to listen to this are listening, and of course we would be happy to have further communication with those people. So thank you very much, Dominic.
Thanks, Clarissa, and yeah, hope everyone manages to derive some sense from what we've been discussing. And good luck to all the delegates in Nairobi. It's a really important meeting.